Hi, my name is Sarah, and if you're watching this, it's probably because you've seen the headline, the one that makes me sound like some scorned wife out for revenge. Maybe I am, but this is my story, and it's a hell of a lot more complicated than any headline could ever tell you. The emptiness hit me first, not the kind of emptiness you feel after a bad day or a fight. This was a hollowed-out emptiness. Like someone had reached inside me and ripped out a vital organ. I came home from work, late, as usual, the smell of stale coffee clinging to my coat. The house was silent. Too silent. Usually, even if Mark was out, the TV would be blaring some sports game, or the dog, Buster, would be barking his head off, ecstatic to see me. But nothing. Just silence. "Mark?" I called out, my voice echoing in the hallway. No answer. I shrugged it off. Maybe he'd gone to the gym, or grabbed a drink with the guys. He was supposed to be home for dinner, though. We had reservations. Our anniversary? I went to the kitchen, flipped on the light, and that's when I saw it. The note! It was on the counter, propped against a sugar bowl, written in Mark's sloppy, hurried handwriting. It said, "Sarah, I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. I've met someone else. I'm leaving. Don't try to find me. Mark." Pause, voice cracked slightly, that was it. "I'm sorry." Like he was apologizing for bumping into me at the grocery store. My hands started to shake. The note felt like it was burning my skin. I read it again. And again! Each time, the words seemed to twist and morph, becoming more cruel, more incomprehensible. Met someone else? After 15 years? After everything we'd built? After all the promises? My mind started racing. Who was this woman? How long had this been going on? I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen. I needed to call him, to scream at him, to demand answers. But then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. The safe. We kept all our savings in a safe, hidden behind a painting in the study. It was our emergency fund, our retirement nest egg, everything we'd worked for. I ran to the study, my heart pounding in my chest. I ripped the painting off the wall. My hands trembled as I punched in the code. The safe clicked open. Empty. Completely and utterly empty. Music becomes more intense. A driving rhythm begins. He'd taken everything. Every last penny. Gone. Just like that. My husband. My best friend. My partner. Gone. And he'd stolen my life in the process. I sank to the floor, the cold tile pressing against my cheek. The reality of the situation crashed down on me like a tidal wave. He wasn't just leaving. He was destroying me. I stayed there for I don't know how long, just staring at the empty safe, tears streaming down my face. I felt numb, betrayed, and terrified. What was I going to do? How was I going to survive? The next few days were a blur of shock and disbelief. I called in sick to work, which I knew was stupid, because I'd probably lose my job if I didn't show up soon. But I just couldn't face the world. My friends and family tried to be supportive, but their words of comfort felt hollow. "You're better off without him," they said. "He wasn't good enough for you." Easy for them to say. They weren't the ones staring down the barrel of financial ruin. I went to the police, but they couldn't do much. Because Mark had access to the money, it wasn't technically theft. Just a really messy divorce waiting to happen. They advised me to see a lawyer. Lawyer fees? With what money? I started going through our finances. The credit cards were maxed out. There were loans I didn't even know about. Mark had been living a double life, and I'd been completely oblivious. I felt like an idiot. How could I have been so blind? So trusting? Voice filled with self-loathing, I started replaying our entire marriage in my head, searching for clues I'd missed. The late nights at the office, the unexplained expenses, the way he'd stopped looking at me. It all made sense now, sickeningly, heartbreakingly clear. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Davis. She listened to my story with a grim expression. "We can try to recover the assets," she said, "but it's going to be an uphill battle. He's probably covered his tracks. What about this woman?" I asked. "Can we go after her?" "Miss?" Davis sighed. "Unfortunately, in this state, there's not much we can do. Alienation of affection laws are pretty weak. Unless we can prove she actively conspired to defraud you, it's unlikely we'll get anything from her." So, the woman who had stolen my husband and my life was going to get away with it scot-free. That thought was almost unbearable. I started obsessing over her. Who was she? What did she look like? What did Mark see in her that he didn't see in me? I scrolled through his social media, searching for any hint, any clue. Nothing. He'd been careful. Too careful. Music shifts to a more investigative, determined tone, but I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I deserved answers, and I was going to get them, no matter what it took. I decided to become my own detective. I started with his phone records. Miss Davis helped me obtain them legally. I pored over the numbers, looking for patterns, for anything that stood out. And then I found it. A number he'd called dozens of times in the past few months. A number that wasn't in his contacts. A number I didn't recognize. I Googled it, and the results made my stomach churn. The number belonged to a woman named Jessica Miller, and she worked at the bank where Mark had his accounts. Jessica Miller, a bank teller, younger than me, probably prettier than me, and clearly someone who had no qualms about sleeping with a married man and helping him drain his accounts. I found her picture online. She had long, blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a smile that seemed a little too perfect. She looked innocent, which made me even angrier. I knew I needed to confront her. I needed to look her in the eye and ask her why she had done this to me. But Miss Davis advised against it. "Don't do anything rash," she warned. "You could jeopardize the case." "Let me handle this," but I couldn't wait. I was too angry, too hurt. The next day, I drove to the bank. I parked across the street and watched, waiting for Jessica Miller to arrive. I saw her pull up in a red convertible. She was even more striking in person. She walked into the bank with a confident stride, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to erupt in her life. I took a deep breath and followed her inside. The bank was busy, filled with the usual sounds of transactions and conversations. I spotted Jessica behind the counter, helping a customer. I waited my turn, my heart pounding in my chest. I practiced what I was going to say. I wanted to be calm, to be composed, but I knew that was probably impossible. Finally, the customer left, and Jessica looked up. She saw me, and her smile faltered for a split second. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice a little too sweet. "I'm Sarah," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Sarah," Mark's last name. Her eyes widened. She knew. She definitely knew. I don't understand," she stammered. "Don't play dumb with me," I said, my voice rising. "You know exactly who I am. You're the woman my husband ran away with. The woman who helped him steal all my money." Music becomes more frantic. A ticking clock sound effect is added. A few heads turned. The other tellers looked nervous. Jessica's face was pale. I didn't know he was married," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh, please," I scoffed. "You expect me to believe that? He drained our accounts. He left me with nothing. And you're telling me you didn't know? He told me? He told me he was getting a divorce," she said, her voice shaking. He said his wife was abusive." "Abusive? Me?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mark was trying to paint me as the villain. "That's a lie," I shouted. "He's manipulating you. He's a liar and a thief." The bank manager rushed over, his face red with anger. "Ma'am, you need to leave," he said. "You're disturbing the peace. I'm not leaving until I get some answers," I yelled. Jessica started to cry. "Please," she sobbed. Just leave me alone. I wanted to slap her. I wanted to scream at her. But I knew I was losing control. And I knew that was exactly what Mark wanted. I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down. Fine, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I'll leave. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. I turned and walked out of the bank, leaving Jessica Miller sobbing behind the counter. As I drove away, I realized something. Jessica was scared. Really scared. And that made me wonder, what else was Mark hiding? I went back to Miss Davis's office, feeling defeated and ashamed. I had acted impulsively and I probably made things worse. I told you not to confront her, Miss, Davis said, shaking her head. Now she's going to clam up. It's going to be even harder to get anything out of her. I know, I said. I messed up. But she said something. She said Mark told her I was abusive. That's insane! He's trying to make me look like the bad guy, Miss. Davis frowned. That's not good. He could be trying to build a case against you. He might be planning to file for divorce himself and try to get alimony or even custody if you have children. Custody? We didn't have children. But the thought that Mark would try to twist the truth like that made me sick to my stomach. We need to be careful, Miss, Davis said. We need to gather as much evidence as possible. Anything that proves he's been lying, that he's been planning this for a while. I nodded. I was ready to do whatever it took. I went back home, feeling exhausted and discouraged. I checked the mail, hoping for something, anything, that would give me a glimmer of hope. There was only one package, a small, brown envelope addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting. I opened it cautiously. Inside, there was a USB drive and a note. The note said, "He's not who you think he is. Trust no one." A friend music picks up. A sense of urgency is added. My hands started to shake. What was this? Who sent it? And what was on the USB drive? I hesitated. I knew I should probably take it to Miss Davis, but I couldn't wait. I had to know. I plugged the USB drive into my computer. A folder popped up labeled Mark. The first opened it. And what I found inside changed everything. There were documents, emails, and photos. Evidence of a life I never knew my husband was living. Evidence of fraud, embezzlement, and something much, much worse. The files on the USB drive painted a horrifying picture of Mark's double life. It turned out that Mark wasn't just having an affair and stealing my money. He was involved in something much bigger, something much more dangerous. He had been embezzling money from his company for years, funneling it into offshore accounts. He was working with a group of shady individuals, people involved in organized crime. And Jessica Miller? She wasn't just a naive bank teller. She was in on it too. She had been helping Mark launder the money, transferring it through various accounts. The photos were the most disturbing. They showed Mark with these people, laughing, drinking, celebrating. He looked like he was having the time of his life. He looked like a completely different person. Voice filled with disgust and disbelief, I felt like I was going insane. How could I have been married to this man for 15 years and not known who he really was? The note that came with the USB drive said, "He's not who you think he is." That was the understatement of the century. I immediately called Miss Davis and told her everything. She was shocked, but not surprised. "This changes everything," she said. "This is no longer just a divorce case. This is a criminal investigation waiting to happen." She advised me to go to the authorities, to hand over the USB drive and tell them everything I knew, but I hesitated. I was scared. These people were dangerous. What if they came after me? What if they tried to silence me? "I don't know, Miss Davis," I said. "I'm afraid for my life." "I understand," she said. "But you can't keep this to yourself. These people need to be stopped, and you're the only one who can do it." She was right. I couldn't let these people get away with it. I had to do something. I agreed to go to the authorities. but I insisted on having protection. Miss Davis arranged for me to meet with a detective, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Detective Miller, no relation to Jessica, thankfully. Detective Miller listened to my story with a serious expression. She examined the USB drive and the documents. "This is big," she said. "This could take down a lot of people." She promised to protect me and to investigate Mark and his associates. She also warned me that I might be in danger. "These people are ruthless," she said. "They won't hesitate to silence you if they think you're a threat." I knew she was right, but I couldn't back down now. I had come too far. Music becomes more intense. A sense of impending danger is added. Detective Miller and her team started investigating Mark and his associates. They tracked their movements, monitored their phone calls, and gathered evidence. I stayed in hiding, moving from hotel to hotel, constantly looking over my shoulder. I felt like I was living in a movie. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation dragged on. I was starting to lose hope. What if Mark got away? What if these people were too powerful to be stopped? And then, one day, Detective Miller called me. "We have him," she said. "We arrested Mark and several of his associates this morning. They're in custody." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. Or so I thought. The news of Mark's arrest spread like wildfire. It was all over the news. My friends and family were shocked and relieved. I finally felt safe enough to go back home. But the house felt different. It was no longer a home filled with love and laughter. It was a crime scene, a reminder of the betrayal and deceit. I started the long and arduous process of rebuilding my life. I had to find a new job, pay off the debts Mark had accumulated, and try to heal from the emotional trauma. The divorce proceedings were messy and complicated. Mark's lawyers tried to argue that I was complicit in his crimes, that I knew all along what he was doing. But Detective Miller and Miss Davis presented evidence that proved my innocence. They showed that I was a victim, just like everyone else. Eventually, Mark agreed to a settlement. He had to forfeit all the money he had stolen, and he was sentenced to a long prison term. Jessica Miller was also arrested and charged with money laundering. She pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence. I thought I had finally gotten justice. I thought I could finally move on with my life. But then, something happened that changed everything. Music becomes more mysterious. A sense of unease is added. Detective Miller called me and asked me to come to the police station. She said she had something important to tell me. I went to the station, feeling nervous and apprehensive. What could she possibly want to tell me now? She led me to a small conference room and sat me down. She looked at me with a serious expression. "Sarah," she said, "we've been investigating Mark and his associates for a while now, and we've uncovered some things that you need to know." She paused, as if she was trying to find the right words. "It turns out that Mark wasn't just embezzling money," she said. "He was also involved in human trafficking." Human trafficking? My blood ran cold. He was using his company as a front to transport women across state lines, Detective Miller said. He was forcing them into prostitution, and he was making a lot of money doing it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband, the man I had loved and trusted, was a monster. "We've identified several victims," Detective Miller said, "and we're trying to help them get their lives back on track." She paused again. "There's something else," she said. "Something that you need to know about Jessica Miller." Detective Miller took a deep breath. "Jessica Miller," she said, "was one of Mark's victims." I stared at her in disbelief. "What?" I said. "But she was helping him. She was laundering his money." "That's what he wanted you to think," Detective Miller said. "But the truth is, Jessica was being forced to do it. Mark had threatened her family. He had told her that if she didn't cooperate, he would hurt them. It all started to make sense. The fear in Jessica's eyes. The way she had begged me to leave her alone. She wasn't Mark's lover. She was his prisoner. Voice filled with shock and realization he had groomed her. Detective Miller continued. He had manipulated her, controlled her, and turned her into a tool for his own twisted purposes. Jessica had been working at the bank when Mark first approached her. He had seemed charming and successful. He had showered her with attention and gifts. But then, he had started asking her for favors. Small things at first, like looking the other way when he made suspicious transactions. And then, he had started making threats. He had found out about her family, about her sick mother and her younger brother. He had told her that if she didn't do what he said, he would make sure they suffered. Jessica had been trapped. She had been forced to choose between protecting her family and doing the right thing. She had chosen her family. She's been cooperating with us, Detective Miller said. She's been providing us with valuable information about Mark and his associates. She's trying to make amends for what she's done. I felt a wave of sympathy for Jessica. She was a victim, just like me. We had both been betrayed by the same man. Where is she now? I asked. She's in witness protection, Detective Miller said. She's starting a new life, far away from here. I asked if I could speak to her. Detective Miller said she would see what she could do. A few days later, I received a phone call from Jessica. Her voice was hesitant and shaky. Sarah? She said. Is that you? Yes, Jessica, I said. It's me. There was a long silence. I don't know what to say, Jessica said. I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't know. I didn't know what he was really doing. I know, I said. I understand. You were just trying to protect your family. He's a monster, Jessica said. He ruined my life. He ruined so many lives. He's going to pay for what he did, I said. He's going to be in prison for a long time. I hope so, Jessica said. I hope he rots in hell. We talked for a while longer. We shared our stories, our pain, our hopes for the future. By the end of the conversation, I felt a sense of closure. I had finally gotten the answers I needed. I had finally understood the truth about Mark and Jessica. The trial was a media circus. Mark was portrayed as a cold-blooded criminal, a monster who had preyed on vulnerable women and stolen millions of dollars. He tried to defend himself, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life in prison. His associates were also convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Jessica Miller testified at the trial, providing crucial evidence against Mark. She was praised for her courage and her willingness to cooperate with the authorities. After the trial, I started the process of rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. I had lost everything: my money, my home, my marriage, my sense of security, but I was determined to move on. I found a new job, a small apartment, and a new group of friends. I started therapy to deal with the emotional trauma. It helped me to process my feelings and to forgive myself for being so blind. I also started volunteering at a local shelter for victims of human trafficking. I wanted to help other women who had been through what I had been through. It was a long and difficult journey, but I eventually found peace and happiness. I learned to trust again, to love again, and to believe in myself again. Voice filled with hope and resilience, I never forgot what happened to me. It changed me forever, but it also made me stronger. It taught me the importance of resilience, of forgiveness, and of never giving up on myself. And what about Jessica? I never saw her again, but I heard that she was doing well. She had started a new life, a new career, and a new relationship. She had found her own path to healing and happiness. I'm often asked if I hate Mark. The truth is, I don't. I pity him. He's a broken man, trapped in a prison of his own making. I've learned that holding on to anger and hatred only hurts you in the end. It's better to let go and move on. A year after the trial, I received another package in the mail. It was a plain, unmarked envelope. Inside, there was a check, a very large check. It was made out to me, and it was signed by an anonymous donor. The memo line said, "For a new beginning." I was stunned. Who would do something like this? Who would give me such a generous gift? I called Miss Davis and told her about the check. She was as surprised as I was. "We'll try to find out who sent it," she said, "but it might be impossible. They probably want to remain anonymous." I deposited the check and used the money to start a foundation to help victims of domestic violence and human trafficking. I wanted to pay it forward, to help other women find their way out of darkness. I never found out who sent the check, but I had a feeling it was someone who knew what I had been through, someone who wanted to help me heal. Music becomes more sentimental. A feeling of gratitude is added sometimes. I think it was Jessica. Maybe she wanted to make amends for her role in Mark's crimes. Maybe she wanted to give me a fresh start. Or maybe it was someone else entirely. Maybe it was someone who had been touched by my story, someone who believed in the power of forgiveness and redemption. Whoever it was, I'm grateful for their generosity. Their gift gave me the opportunity to make a difference in the world, to help other women find their way to safety and healing. My life is not perfect. I still have scars, but I'm no longer defined by what happened to me. I'm defined by how I responded to it. I'm a survivor. I'm a fighter. And I'm determined to make the world a better place. Life settled into a new normal. The foundation was thriving, helping countless women. I even started dating again, cautiously but with an open heart. I was finally, truly happy. Then, out of the blue, Detective Miller called. Her voice wasn't the usual professional tone I was used to. There was a hesitation. "Sarah," she began, "there's something about the case. Something we didn't tell you before. Something about the USB drive." My blood ran cold. What else could there possibly be? "We finally identified who sent it," she continued. "The friend." I waited, my breath caught in my throat. It was Mark's mother. Music drops out completely. A beat of silence. My mind went blank. Mark's mother? The woman who had always seemed so disapproving of me? The woman who had barely tolerated my existence? She knew what he was doing, Detective Miller explained. She suspected for years. She tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. She was disgusted by what he had become. When she realized the extent of his crimes, especially the trafficking, she couldn't live with it. She anonymously contacted us at the same time she sent the USB drive to you. But why didn't she just go to the police herself? I stammered. She was afraid, Detective Miller said. Afraid of Mark, afraid of what he would do to her. She was also ashamed. She felt responsible, somehow, for raising him. She thought that if she went to the police directly, it would ruin her family's name. Voice filled with confusion and a strange mix of emotions. It was all so twisted. This woman, who I had always perceived as my enemy, had actually been my secret benefactor, my silent protector. She had risked everything to expose her own son, to bring him to justice. She passed away a few months ago, Detective Miller continued, her voice softening. Cancer. She never wanted you to know. She didn't want any credit. She just wanted to do what was right. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Grief, confusion, gratitude, and a strange sense of connection to this woman I had barely known. I realized that even in the darkest of situations, there can be unexpected allies, hidden acts of kindness, and surprising twists of fate. Mark's mother, my perceived enemy, had become my unlikely savior. The story doesn't end there, of course. Life goes on. I continue to run the foundation, helping women rebuild their lives. I've found love again, a kind and understanding man who appreciates me for who I am. I sometimes think about Mark, locked away in prison. I don't hate him, but I don't forgive him either. He made his choices, and he has to live with the consequences. And I think about Jessica out there somewhere, living her new life. I hope she's found peace and happiness. I hope she knows that I don't blame her. And I think about Mark's mother, the woman who saved my life without ever wanting to be acknowledged. I owe her everything. My story is a story of betrayal, loss, and resilience. But it's also a story of hope, forgiveness, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always light to be found. You just have to be willing to look for it. And sometimes, that light comes from the most unexpected places.